When we talk about human rights, we tend to think of it as this one solid, unchanging idea. But what if it's not like that at all? What if it's more like looking at the world through different lenses, where each one reveals something totally new? Today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're exploring the three major theories, the three lenses that shape our entire understanding of human rights: liberalism, Marxism, and feminism.
So, let me ask you something right off the bat. Where do your rights come from? Seriously, think about it. Are they just given to you by a government? Are you born with them like they're part of your DNA? Or are they something we have to fight for as a society? How you answer that question, well, it gets right to the heart of everything we're talking about today.
And see, all those different answers aren't just random opinions. They're actually organized into what we call human rights theories. You can think of them as the blueprints, the architectural plans that explain the very foundation of our rights. So let's dive into the first one, which is probably the most familiar to many of us.
First up, we have the liberal view. This is the classic Western perspective, the one that puts the individual right at the center of the universe. It's the foundation for so many constitutions and legal systems that we see all around the world.
And the logic behind it is actually pretty simple, but really powerful. For liberalism, you are born with rights, period. They aren't a gift from the government. In fact, the government's main job is to protect those rights by staying out of your business as much as possible. The whole point of the law is to put a leash on government power, not on you.
So this brings us to a really crucial idea: negative rights. Now, the word negative here doesn't mean something bad. It just means freedom from something, specifically freedom from the government messing with you. It's all about creating this protected bubble around you, where you are free from being controlled. This idea is at the heart of so many of our political debates today, right? It all comes back to this one core tension.
And if you look at these examples, it becomes super clear. Your freedom of speech means the government can't just shut you up. Your right to own property means it can't just take your stuff. It's all about protecting you from an overreaching state. But, as you can probably guess, this viewpoint isn't the whole story.
In this question right here, this hits on the central weakness that a lot of people see in the purely liberal view. I mean, what good is your right to speak freely if you can't afford an education, or if you're so exhausted from working 3 jobs that you don't even have the energy to have an opinion? This very critique opens the door for our second lens.
And that's the perfect lead-in to our second lens, the Marxist critique. This perspective basically looks at the liberal view and says, hey, wait a minute, you're focusing on the individual, but you're missing the real story. And for Marxists, that real story is all about the economic systems that control our lives. From this point of view, all those individual rights, like freedom of speech, are basically meaningless if you don't have economic security first. Marxism argues that liberal rights end up mostly protecting the property and power of the wealthy, while the working class gets left behind. So the focus shifts away from the individual and zooms out to the collective, the community, and the social class. And this leads us to the exact opposite of negative rights: positive rights. Again, positive here doesn't just mean good. It means the state has to take positive action. It has to actually do something to ensure your rights. This is all about the freedom to have the basic building blocks of a decent life. It's the whole philosophy behind things like public education and social safety nets.
These examples make it crystal clear, don't they? A right to education? That means the government has a duty to actually provide schools. A right to health care means it has to make sure you can see a doctor when you're sick. Here, the state isn't just a referee. It's an active player on the field, responsible for making sure everyone's basic needs are met.
Okay, but here's the massive catch, right? If the state has the power to give you everything you need, it also has the power to take everything away. And that includes all those individual freedoms that the liberal view cares so much about. This creates a very real risk of authoritarianism, where individual voices are silenced for the so-called greater good. So, we've got this big clash between individual freedom on one side and collective well-being on the other. But our third lens comes in and argues that both of these huge theories, liberalism and Marxism, were developed in a world run by men, and because of that, they both missed a giant piece of the human experience.
What's so powerful about the feminist critique is how it points out that both of these older theories were basically gender blind. It makes the simple but revolutionary claim that women's rights aren't some separate niche category, they are human rights. And crucially, it introduces this idea of intersectionality, the concept that you can't just look at gender or just race or just class. You have to see how they all intersect and pile on top of each other to shape a person's life.
Now, this next idea was an absolute game changer. For centuries, the law pretty much stopped at your front door. What happened in the private sphere, inside the family, was considered off-limits to the state. Feminism completely shattered that wall, arguing that some of the most horrific human rights violations, like domestic violence, happen precisely in that so-called private space.
Just think about how this lens fundamentally expanded what we even consider a human right. Things like the right to bodily autonomy or freedom from sexual harassment, these were just not on the radar for those early liberal or Marxist thinkers. Feminism dragged these private struggles out into the public conversation and reframed them as what they are: essential human rights.
Of course, just like any theory, this lens has its own critiques. Some people argue that certain feminist approaches can become so focused on gender that they might unintentionally overlook the unique issues that men face, or other kinds of inequality that aren't directly tied to gender. It's a really important and ongoing debate.
All right, so we've looked through the lens of the individual, the lens of the economy, and the lens of gender. Now, let's see if we can put it all together and get one clear picture.
This chart really breaks it all down for us. You've got liberalism, focused on the individual, which calls for a minimal state. Then you have Marxism, focused on the economy, which demands a strong welfare state. And finally, feminism, focused on gender equality, which says the state has to actively transform society to protect women. See? 3 different ways of seeing the problem, and 3 very different solutions.
But what if it's not about choosing just one? Maybe the most complete, the most robust vision of human rights isn't about picking a side, but about layering them. Maybe you start with a strong foundation of individual liberty. Then you build on top of that with a real commitment to economic fairness for everybody. And then you make sure that entire structure, from top to bottom, is infused with gender justice.
So we end up back where we started, but now you've got 3 new tools in your intellectual toolkit. When you look at the world's biggest challenges, economic inequality, social divides, political polarization, which one of these lenses helps you make the most sense of it all? Is one of them more urgent than the others right now? That's the question I want to leave you with.